My mother-in-law stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table and said the words that changed everything between us forever. She looked around the room at 9 people: her husband, her eldest son Vikram, his wife Deepa, her daughter Ananya, Ananya's husband Rohan, 2 women from temple she had invited as witnesses, and me, and she said, "I think we should take a vote on whether Priya should continue attending family gatherings." She said it calmly, like she was proposing a change in the dinner menu. Like the thing she was asking people to vote on was not the exclusion of a human being from her own family, but a minor adjustment that everyone would feel better about once it was settled. My 5-year-old daughter Mira was in the room watching cartoons and eating the kheer I had made that morning. Because I always made kheer for family dinners. Because my husband Arjun loved his mother's kheer growing up. And I had learned the recipe from YouTube 6 years ago. Because I wanted to make something that tasted like home for the family I married into. Sunita looked around the table and said, "All in favor." Every hand went up. 9 hands. Vikram's went up first fast, like he had been waiting. Deepa followed because Deepa always followed Vikram. Ananya raised hers slowly, eyes on the table. Rohan raised his because Rohan did whatever Ananya did. Mahesh, my father-in-law, raised his last with the exhausted compliance of a man who had stopped disagreeing with his wife decades ago. The temple women raised theirs because guests do what Suna Sharma asks, especially when her disapproval can make a family's social standing disappear overnight. Mira appeared in the doorway 2 seconds after the vote holding a plastic cup of juice. She looked at the room and said, "Mama, why is everyone so quiet?" I picked her up. I held her against my hip. I looked at Sunita. I said, "Thank you for dinner," and I walked out. In the car, Mira asked, "Mama, are you sad?" I said, "I'm thinking, baby." She said, "About what?" I said, "About what to do next." We got ice cream on Broad Street. Mira got vanilla with sprinkles. I got nothing because my stomach was a knot of adrenaline and humiliation, and something colder and more useful than either of those things, something that would later reveal itself as strategy. What none of them knew, what Sunita and every person at that table could not have known because they had never bothered to look closely at the woman they were voting against, was that I had been keeping records for 8 months. Not because I had anticipated the vote, but because I am a forensic accountant. My name is Priya Kapoor Sharma. I am 33 years old. I spend my professional life examining financial records for fraud, tracing money through systems designed to hide it, finding the truth that people bury under layers of paperwork and lies. And when things in my marriage had started feeling wrong 8 months earlier, my professional instincts kicked in before my emotions caught up, and I started documenting everything: dates, conversations, financial transactions, text messages, methodically and without emotion, because documentation is not revenge, it is protection. 8 months before the vote, I had checked our joint savings account on a Tuesday morning and found it $12, lower than it should have been. 3 withdrawals over 6 months, each between $3,500 and $4,500, each on a date when Arjun had visited his parents alone. I didn't confront him. A forensic accountant doesn't confront. A forensic accountant documents. I traced the money, not through complex forensics, but through something simpler. I watched. I listened. Vikram mentioned needing capital for his import business. Sunita mentioned that family always supports each other financially. Arjun mentioned nothing, which was itself information. The money from our house savings had gone through Arjun to Sunita to Vikram. A chain of hands designed to create distance between source and destination. The kind of layered transaction I unraveled professionally every single week. My husband was funding his brother's failing business with our daughter's future at his mother's direction. I found a text on Arjun's iPad that said, "Mom says take it from the joint account. Priya won't notice. Priya won't notice." He wrote that about me. The forensic accountant. The woman whose literal job was noticing when money moved wrong. He confused my patience with ignorance. He mistook my silence for oblivion. But I wasn't discovering things. While documenting the personal fraud, I found something bigger. Arjun's email had quarterly financial statements from the family grocery stores, 3 locations Mahesh had built over 30 years. I looked at those statements the way I look at every financial document, carefully, and what I saw made me sit very still. The business was bleeding, revenue declining, expenses inflating, vendor payments to companies that didn't exist, payroll entries for employees who weren't real, cash withdrawals with no documentation. Someone was stealing from the family business. And the pattern pointed directly at Vikram. The same Vikram who needed capital, the same Vikram whose hand went up first at the vote. The same Vikram who had been receiving my savings through my husband. Vikram was embezzling from the family stores and using my husband as an additional funding source, and Sunita was either helping him or completely blind to it. If you have ever discovered that someone you trusted was secretly working against you, drop a comment right now because this part of the story is where it gets real, and I need to know I'm not alone. The Monday after the vote, I called 2 attorneys, Sandra Chen for family law, Margaret Chen, no relation, for business litigation. I showed Sandra my marriage documentation, the financial records, the text messages, the pattern of family hostility. She said, "This is one of the most well-documented cases I've seen in an initial consultation." I said, "I'm a forensic accountant." She said, "I can see that." I showed Margaret the business records. She reviewed them for 45 minutes and said, "You're right. There's a pattern consistent with embezzlement." "The total is significant," I said, "approximately $127,000 over 18 months. Margaret looked at me with the expression I recognized from colleagues who had watched me dismantle a fraud in a conference room. She said, "What's your end game?" I said, "I want my family to survive. Not the family that voted against me. The family I'm building for my daughter." On Friday, 5 days after the vote, I sat Arjun down at our kitchen table after Mira was asleep. I opened my laptop. I turned it toward him. On the screen was a spreadsheet showing every withdrawal from our savings matched against deposits into Vikram's account within 48 hours, a perfect mirror. His face went through confusion, recognition, then fear. He told me everything. Sunita had told him Vikram needed help. She told him not to worry me about it because I would overreact, because I didn't understand how Indian families work. He had believed her. He had taken $12, zero from our daughter's future, and handed it to his mother in cash. Then I showed him the second spreadsheet, the one showing Vikram's embezzlement from the family stores, $127,000 in phantom vendors, ghost employees, and unexplained cash withdrawals. Arjun put his head in his hands. He said, "I'm sorry, Priya, about the money, about the vote, about my mother, about all of it." I said, "Here's what's going to happen." I laid out the plan, a family meeting, not at Sunita's house, not on Sunita's terms, in Margaret Chen's conference room with evidence on the table and attorneys in the room, and the truth finally out in the open. The meeting happened the following Wednesday, 1 week after the vote. Margaret's conference room had glass walls, a long table, water pitchers. The kind of room designed for conversations that change things permanently. Sunita arrived in her best silk sari because she thought this was about business expansion. Vikram arrived in a suit looking confident because he didn't know what was coming. Everyone sat down. Margaret introduced herself. Then she turned to me. I opened the folder. I laid out the evidence the way I lay out evidence in professional cases, one document at a time, each one building on the last, each one tightening the circle until there was nowhere left to stand. The phantom vendors, the ghost employees, the cash trail, the timeline, every document pointing at Vikram. The room went silent. Vikram's confidence collapsed. Sunita's hand went to her chest. She looked at Vikram and said his name once. He couldn't speak. Sunita turned to me. She said, "How did you find this?" I said, "I'm a forensic accountant, Sunita. This is what I do." And I watched her understand for the first time who I actually was. Not the daughter-in-law who made kheer and smiled through insults, not the outsider who didn't understand Indian families. A professional who could read a spreadsheet the way a doctor reads an X-ray, and who had just diagnosed the thing killing her family from the inside. The son she favored, the son she protected, the son she funded with money stolen from my savings, was the son destroying everything she had built. Vikram said I was going to pay it back. I said, "You said the same thing about my $12,000. Margaret outlined the options: formal audit, repayment, potential criminal charges, or a quiet resolution. Vikram removed from the business, full repayment, and restructured ownership, reflecting who was actually protecting the family and who was exploiting it. Sunita asked for a moment alone with Mahesh. Through the glass walls, I watched them talk. Mahesh's hands were moving, which was unusual. Sunita was still, which was unusual. When everyone returned, Sunita looked at me. She said 3 words I had waited 5 years to hear. I was wrong. She didn't elaborate. She didn't apologize for the vote or the years of undermining. 3 words. Heavy and real and insufficient but present. The agreement was reached that afternoon. Vikram removed from management. Full repayment on a structured schedule. My $12.00 returned within 6 months. and the LLC restructured with a 20% stake, transferred to a trust in Mira's name, managed by me. My 5-year-old daughter now owned part of the family business her grandmother had tried to exclude her mother from. If stories like this resonate with you, please subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. That was 11 months ago. The stores are stable. Vikram is making payments. He doesn't come to dinners anymore. Deepa filed for divorce. Ananya called me one evening and said, "I'm sorry I raised my hand." I said, "I know." She said, "You're braver than I am." I said, "I'm not brave, I'm organized. There's a difference." Sunita and I have reached what I would call respectful distance. She sees Mira every other weekend. She calls before she comes. She doesn't comment on my cooking, my parenting, or my career. She doesn't organize votes. Arjun and I are in couples therapy. It is slow and hard, and there are days when I see the man who wrote, "Priya won't notice," and the anger rises like heat. And there are days when I see the man who sat beside me in that conference room and chose my side for the first time. I don't know yet which version is real. Maybe both are. Mira drew a family picture last week. Crayons on construction paper taped to the refrigerator. Me in the center tall with what she called my thinking face. Arjun beside me. Sunita off to the side. Smaller than before, but present. Nobody erased. My daughter drew a family that included everyone, even the people who tried to exclude her mother, because children have a capacity for inclusion that adults lose when they learn love can be conditional, and power can be more seductive than kindness. I looked at that drawing for a long time. Then I went to the kitchen and made here. Not because anyone asked, because my daughter likes it and my husband likes it, and home is not a place someone gives you or a table someone lets you sit at. Home is what you build when you stop asking for permission to exist. My name is Priya Kapoor Sharma. I am 33 years old. They raised their hands against me. I raised my standards. They voted me out. I walked back in with a folder full of truth and the quiet, devastating power of a woman who had been paying attention the whole time. And I am still here, still standing, still counting, and every number tells the truth.